All right. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, Alan.
And welcome to Dice Over Everything.
So this week we want to talk about traveling places. So
in space.
So let's say you were off in space and you're in the, going for a travel over to the Andromeda Galaxy, but traveling at light speed was kind of slow for you. So you're like, I should get there faster. You gotta pick another way to get there.
Obviously, I would. If we're talking about real world thing, I would just be like, let's live forever. And then just take the thousands of years that it takes to get there. And that'd be fine.
You just take your time and walk.
Yeah, of course. But maybe that's not as practical, although in some ways it's even more practical because it's doable with modern technology. But that's not good for storylines because we don't understand really what happens in a million years. The story will be really, really weird. It'll be mostly you wake up, check your news feed, nothing happened.
You check 15 minutes later because you're just that impatient.
And you're really bored. Then you go to sleep for another million years, and that just happens for 1,000 pages.
And then after a million years, you've got another tweet at you. Okay.
from the other guy that woke up, you keep on waking up at different times. Yeah. So the reason why this is a topic is because our game, Starpiercer, it happens that all of the worlds are spread around the galaxy because it's a spaceship game.
Of course. So spaceships have to be able to get from place to place.
And it's not as interesting I guess it would be kind of interesting if it's only in one solar system. But that's not what we went to because that's not the science fiction we grew up with.
No, it's not what we see as sci-fi. We see sci-fi as you jump over to the next galaxy in a day or two tops.
Or next solar system.
Yep.
Not necessarily the next galaxy. Okay. Most of the sci-fi we actually consume is not galaxy jumping.
No.
Like Star Wars. Long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Not multiple galaxies.
Yep.
Right? When we look at one of the first miniature games that we played, 40K, it's the galaxy. Star Trek, one galaxy too. They don't go to multiple galaxies.
That's right. I don't know if Voyager got lost when they went to another galaxy, or they went beyond the edge.
It's possible because you have beings who are able to teleport from one galaxy to another, but I don't think they went to other galaxies either, right? Because you divide it up by sector. Yeah. I don't know. You're the big Star Trek fan. I only watched it recreationally. I watched it for the personal drama.
Okay, and the societal commentary.
Yes, exactly. Kind of, yeah. Is that the wrong way to watch it? Is that
the wrong way to watch sci-fi?
That's the way I love it.
Is sci-fi supposed to be space battles? Well, as far as our game goes, sci-fi is about space battles.
But not just that. Because I love sci-fi, it has to be convincing space battles.
It has to be a space opera, not just a battle.
Yes, exactly. So, so today we thought we'd talk about traveling and how it makes sense to have a star-spanning civilization.
And what different sci-fi themes have been used for getting between galaxy to galaxy in all the popular
solar system to solar system.
Solar system to solar system. All right, I'm thinking too big.
Don't think too big. I don't even know how many science fiction things are galaxy to galaxy. There's very few of them. The only one that I really liked was probably Hitchhiker's Guide. Okay. That was galaxy to galaxy, right?
All right, but that was a comedy, so
yeah, but it was still good.
Yep.
So yeah, I can't even really think. Oh, and Andromeda, which is literally just two galaxies, right?
Yes.
That crash together. Isn't that what it is?
I didn't really care about what they were doing with Andromeda. Andromeda was just Hercules in space.
Yeah, that was
it wasn't about the spaceships. It was about Kevin Sorbo going and punching people in the face.
But as a human this time. Somehow, though, when you go into the far future, a human punching people still works.
Exactly. So I guess with our big sci-fis out there, you think of the two biggest sci-fis, you think of Star Trek and then probably Star Wars. Those are the big two. So obviously they both have faster than light travel, but they break it up into... They don't do it the exact same way. In Star Trek, they have their warp drives and they travel at warp speed. And then in Star Wars, they have their hyperdrives.
That they go in alternate space, but yes. It seems like you're still moving in space. It's probably some sort of, they just call it hyperspace, but it still seems to be warping space. Because when they go into hyperspace, they have to calculate not to go into any physical bodies when they move that fast, right? That's why it takes so long for Han to calculate not teleporting, going into hyperspace to escape in the Millennium Falcon.
Well, you probably don't want to drop out of hyperspace into objects or anything like that.
I thought it was avoiding them when you move.
There might be objects in hyperspace too. We don't know that.
Now we got to go look at the actual quote.
I briefly looked it up before this podcast, but basically hyperspace is supposed to essentially be another dimension. But it doesn't mean
with space. It doesn't with the general objects. It's like another dimension in the universe.
Maybe another dimension in the universe. So it might have some interaction with the obstacles. So you'll end up coming out of your jump in the wrong spot,
or would you in the other dimension, like a large body would still have.
Might still have a presence.
So if you're not careful, you might still run into let's say the shadow of a sun or something like that while you're running through it, and you just get destroyed in hyperspace.
To be fair, I don't think either of us have read the extended universe novels, which might go into that more than the movies.
Yeah, that's true. But Star Wars is not known for being anything but a fantasy in space.
What you mean?
It's more like a fantasy opera in space than a science fiction show.
You mean you think their Jedi magic isn't actually just technology we don't understand? Yes. He tried in the first one saying that it's midichlorians, but that was not well received. So I think they probably retconned that by now and just went back to magic. That's fair.
Yeah, it's space magic with space wizards.
So, I guess if you're making a space game, you've kind of got to go decide on which direction you're going. Yeah. Are you going into? We didn't
mention the last one.
The last one. Which one's the last one?
Space folds. You didn't think about that? Space fold technology, where you connect one spot to another spot. I think that actually happens in Battlestar Galactica. They literally create a hole in space time, right? Or where you connect 2 points, and then it's teleportation. Yep. It's basically teleportation. Not basically, it is teleportation. You cut a hole in the fabric from one place and another one, and you go through, right? Yep. I guess it's not cutting a hole. It's connecting 2 spots in space and going straight through.
Yep. So that's technically different than
the first two. And I watched it on, what was it? Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? He was explaining that, you know what? This actually obeys the laws of physics if we could ever do it, but maybe it's impossible. Yep. But it's not necessarily breaking the laws of physics to do that. So yeah.
Because we know gravity shortens the space between locations, potentially. Well, no, if there's a gravity can shorten the space.
It'll curve it.
Can curve
it. And so the idea is to curve it so much that they touch each other, and then
they become closer together. Yeah. And if they just completely fold together.
Yeah, and then you can go from one to the other.
So I guess
and somehow not get destroyed by going through it.
Yes, not be torn apart, despite because it's a large hole.
Or if you get torn apart, get reassembled on the other end. Yeah, that could be a thing.
Maybe it's like teleportation technology. Yeah, because teleportation is tearing you apart and then.
Yeah, it was even in Star Trek technically. It was only in short distances.
So it's true they have both then in Star Trek. They travel at warp speeds and they tear themselves apart.
But I think the teleportation is actually
a physical,
not light. It's the same speed as light. I think it's the speed of data.
So because they had to have
you have to be within the area.
Line to it and a good communications.
Yeah, and then if you had signal. Low fidelity, they get destroyed.
If they had a bad signal,
they would die or transform into something else.
So technically, they were probably being killed. I think teleportation technology was probably killing them because it was breaking down.
Yeah, there's a
every atom in their body.
Famous nerd philosophical question: is teleportation death and then creating a clone, or is it actual teleportation?
Would you care if you didn't notice the difference?
Would you exist if you died in another being that just is almost exactly like you, but in a different space? Does that it's a different person, so it's not you anymore, right? That's the big thing. Would I kill myself if another being almost exactly like me came into existence, but in a much nicer weather, like in the Caribbean right now?
And they reuse the same matter to put you there?
I don't think teleportation is the same matter.
It's not using the same matter? They have to get the matter there somehow, and they're not drawing it out of the space where you're teleporting to.
So you think they just shoot it, so it just turns into energy, so it can go light speed and then go to the other place and then reassemble?
That might be why people are more okay with it in the Star Trek universe, because you're using the same matter. It's kind of like the same thing as we're talking about with the jumps.
Yeah.
In Battlestar Galactica, they're not creating new.
That's true. You're not creating new. It's the same material. Mm-hmm. It's just getting destroyed and then reassembled. Is that the same person?
They don't say whether
think that is. You know
they
what?
don't say whether your butt atom ends up in like your arm or not.
Right.
But
so that's not the philosophical question.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that actually solves the problem for Star Trek.
Yep.
Because you say that they're the same
matter.
Same matter. So it's like getting destroyed and then coming back together again, right?
Yeah, it's like if your hand falls off and they have to reattach it.
Is it really the same hand? Oh, now it's getting too philosophical.
Okay, so back to ships, not cutting people apart.
So there's the three ways, and if you're talking about spaceship level, you have Battlestar Galactica. You also the one that I really liked is Homeworld, right? Same way, it's the video game, where they basically you have
jump technology,
and they do that. And there's actually a lot of them that do that. So that's the three ways.
Yep.
Alternate dimension, warping space, cutting a hole in space, and going to another place.
Yep.
So for us, when we think about it, we have to decide, like you said, of those three, or alternatives.
Like magic, it could just be completely magic.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to explain. But I think more people want, like, people who care about the background of games, which most gamers care about the background of the game, want, like, okay, here's the theory behind what's going on in this game.
And even if it's magic, they start saying, well, technically, how does the magic work? And they try to turn magic into a science, when that almost defeats the purpose of magic. But,
yeah, exactly. So I think in our game, we want the ships to be fighting at faster than light speeds.
Yeah, because it's a little bit weird when you have like if you take full technology, where you're saying they teleport by going through a fold in space. When they actually fight, that means they have to move at speeds of conventional speeds.
Yep.
Which means when they fight in space, does it really make sense if they can see each other? And how are they shooting each other, right?
Well, they could just be really close together, but they had to jump through space and then motor over slowly to the next guy and make sure the other guy didn't just jump away in the time.
And then on top of that, though, technically, modern day weapons and stuff like that, you don't have to see your target to shoot them.
No.
Which suddenly all of your it opens up a huge can of worms of how you're going to make some sort of space combat make sense.
Yeah.
Right?
If you have jump technology, why would you not just smarten up, jump to where the other ship is? Fire a laser, and then just jump
away,
and let the laser hit them.
Which honestly, it would be a cool game.
It might be, but I think that might be beyond most people's enjoyment of like.
Wouldn't it be cool teleportation? Like you choose where your guy is, and you all secretly put down, I'm gonna move where I'm gonna be next.
Yep.
And then you jump and where your lasers are gonna be, and then you jump there and you fire.
This sounds like a good mechanism for a board game. Cool. It sounds like a board game thing.
Yeah. Sector, right?
Yeah, sector by sector.
I choose this sector. This is the sectors that I'm firing at. This is where I'm jumping. And it's almost like Battleship, but your ships can move.
Oh, so if you jump away, like everybody makes the jump at the same time. So if they have to choose where they make an attack on a sector.
Yes.
And they don't know if you've jumped away by the time they've jumped in.
Yeah, and then you have
or they fire their laser
where you wouldn't jump and you need to charge.
And maybe something.
This is a cool game that we thought of, but this is not the game that we actually have been working on.
No, it's not. It's not that. It's not that more thought.
But that is a good one. We should look at that.
It's an interesting conceptual board game.
Yeah, where the idea, and you would say Battleship, but you move.
Yep.
That's cool. Anyways, that's not what we chose because what we wanted is more
Star Trek feel.
Star Trek kind of feel where. It's almost like a mix between space and naval combat, right? Yep. This is a thing that has a long story tradition, and it's honestly super fun, right? Where you're trying to decide where you're going to turn and where you're going to end up, and you're trying to plan those things. It's not necessarily like a super guessing game, which I agree is probably better as a board game.
No, it's less cerebral and more physical.
Yes. So obviously, as you can tell, we didn't choose the teleporting thing, although we could have, and I think that would be an interesting thing to follow up on. So then we have the other two. We have hyperspace.
Yep.
And we have warp space.
Yep. So I guess in Star Trek, you don't see as many like big space battles, but that's because sometimes it's more about the social commentary. But often, like in the movies, they have big battles, or people try and get away.
Once
during every movie, yeah.
No, most of them are like one-on-one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Most of it's one-on-one. It's not about tons
but
of ships coming
one-on-one
together.
is not quite as fun in terms of maneuvering ships and battling it out in terms of a tabletop game.
Yep.
So
if you look then to Star Wars, where they have more of the big battles, their big battles aren't like occurring at high speeds, and they're just occurring in a sector
where they literally just blast each other.
And if they are chasing each other through hyperspace, they basically end up shooting each other and dropping out.
In Star Wars, they never fight in hyperspace.
No, they don't. They have technology to drop.
That's Star Trek. Star Trek. Occasionally, you have battles in warp space where they're firing at each other in warp space.
Yep, and whoever goes faster is almost the bigger determinant there.
Well, because usually one guy's trying to escape.
Yes.
Right? And then when they fight, for some reason, they don't fight in warp space.
They usually drop out.
Doesn't make much sense.
I guess some of these engines must often get hit and they just drop down.
But then, I guess warp space is too fast. Otherwise, this is one thing that we thought about.
Because they can fire their torpedoes in warp space.
Yeah, if you can fire your lasers and torpedoes in warp space.
Obviously, they're not real lasers and not real physical weapons.
Yeah.
And how do they go that fast if they're not part of your engines?
Yeah, and then if one guy's in warp space, can't they just fire at the guy who's not in warp space and blow them up, and the other guy can't even hit them because...
And they won't even see them coming?
Yeah, it won't even see the things coming because they're fighting in warp space.
But in Star Wars, you can see people coming at you. People don't come out of nowhere.
They only fight in real space.
Yep.
And how they solve the issue is that the big capital ships, when they teleport out in Star Wars, they're basically giant shielded turrets when they teleport into a battle, right? Yep. And really where the real battle happens is dogfighting, right? Because they copied carriers just like bombing each other,
their fighters,
right? Because all of the most important ships are actually the fighters, right?
Yep.
It's all of the X-Wings and the TIE fighters and the bombers. That's really where you win the battle. And the other guys are literally just there to support them and shoot lasers at each other, and they don't even really move.
But that doesn't seem like it would make the funnest mechanic for a game when all you do is you put one thing on one side of the board, one thing on the other side of the board, and you just throw a bucket of dice at each other because you have lots of fighters and they have lots of fighters.
I think that would be fun, but but the real game would be the X-Wing dogfighting, right?
Yes.
And that game is created. It's called X-Wing.
Yep.
So when we looked at it and we thought about what kind of game we really wanted to do, is we wanted to do giant big space battles. I think we mentioned this like Star Trek. So I guess.
But when they have that one big fight every couple movies.
Yes, when they have that big fight every couple movies with multiple ships on each side, multiple capitals on each side, right? So that's the thing we went to, and so that I think you kind of see where we're going. Like we thought, warp space makes the most sense, right?
Yeah,
and you can tell what we were talking about. Why wouldn't a ship in warp space just fly in warp space
and
attack, and then fly back the other way and kill anyone that's not in warp space?
Yep.
And we're like, well, okay, so how do we solve that? Well,
so you should all be fighting in warp space.
All just fight in warp space. Yeah, anyone that's not in warp space is obviously a sitting duck, right? This is what would truly, in my opinion, would happen if you had warp space. And then now you have the idea of everyone fighting in warp space. Now that solves a lot of the problems we talked about before. For example, all of the distances. Suddenly, if you have warped space, it's kind of like magic. You're an entirely different. You can map your normal space into warp space, and suddenly the distances and sizes will all be fucked up.
So you can still have moons there. You can still have like clouds of debris, black holes, and all that.
Yeah,
because they're still there.
Yeah,
but just relative to your speed, they've now become smaller because you go past them faster.
And but a lot of the issues that you have in space combat games is where the scale of battle is weird, right? Because you're fighting on a 6x4 board, your spaceships are like a certain size, and you're like, technically this is actually mapping.
They're like 2 inches long, but
2 inches long is supposed to be like hundreds of or thousands of kilometers actually, right? Because literally there's nothing blocking there's no horizon to block your view. You should be able to see thousands, especially with super good sensors, right? So how does that make sense on your battlefield. They just say, this is just an approximation.
Yeah.
It's in our
proxy.
game,
it's
not
warp
a proxy.
Space.
It's not a proxy. Yeah, it's real.
If you visualized how long it takes objects to get to each other.
In warp space, because everything is warped and compressed, suddenly all of those distances, it's easier to say, of course there's still magic, right? But like in terms of actually what's the math to actually make everything work, it's warp space. Warp space, what we just say, warp space is the magic that solves all the math to make it.
It is the force of spaceships.
Yes, exactly. So then you can kind of say, okay, so actually you don't have to always have in the back of your mind, oh, this is just like an approximation of the battle. No, this is how it kind of looks like. This is how the battle is happening.
Yep.
And it's much closer to, in our universe, what an actual battle would be looking like.
Yep. So have you read the Culture series novels where they sort of also have larger space battles, but there's no movie adaptation of it, so this is less popular.
Yeah, I will eventually read it when it becomes a movie.
Okay.
Or a TV show.
So in that, a lot of their battles are just dealt with by... Their ships essentially have what they call fields around them. So their fields, they're used for attacking, they're used for defending themselves. It's basically like they're using less physical weaponry, but more creating a field
some
around
sort of
themselves.
Energy thing.
So that's how they've sort of decided how battles happen in that world. And they happen at
That would look cool visually.
Yeah.
That's in a lot of video games, they basically do that anyways, right?
You have your... Even with
where
like
there's just some weird charging of something in front of the ship and then a big laser beam goes by.
Yeah.
And kills the other person.
So
it might just because it's easier.
Yep.
In terms of graphics and stuff. But
and you have to fire giant weapons. It's like, well, how do you see the little shot coming out of the ship? It's like, nah, it's a giant energy field. This is going to look cool.
This is like a giant beam, yeah.
Yes. And also in that series, like everything is basically AIs in the future operating the weapons, and they're operating at faster than light speeds because they've basically...
So when they fight...
They're operating in like dimensions beyond the current dimension. But all that really matters is they're operating at faster than light speeds. So
do we want to talk about... Okay, so that's interesting because I've never read the Culture, but it makes a lot of sense, and that's very similar to the way I thought about the story in our game.
Yep.
Right? Now, for my thinking, they have conventional weapons and they shoot it. But of course, to be able to survive in warp speed, they have some sort of field. Come on, force fields. Everyone needs force fields.
Yeah, I think the Culture series might have taken it too much into the conceptual realm. That if you're playing a game, you want to like, because what you understand is physical weapons like bullets, torpedoes, all that.
But the other thing is that all those weapons, if you compress space, right? So that's what like. We didn't really even define what warp space is in general, but our idea with warp space is compressed down, right? So all the distances are much, much shorter in this thing, in some sort of translatable way. So when you shoot or when you go through space, you're not actually going faster than the speed of light. It's that you're compressing space, so your distance is shorter. So like light in your compressed space is actually moving faster than you. It still moves at the constant max, right? But because space is much shorter, you can travel that distance in a much faster way than in unwarped space.
So if you're trying to visualize it, kind of like when you see in Star Trek, the ships actually jump into warp, or you see them traveling through warp, all the stars are in a really dense cluster around them.
Yeah, and they all seem to be compressed and whatever. You have that stretching
stretched
light
out as they
and
go
that
past.
weird thing. So in some ways, it's the opposite. Everything is shortened, right? And so when you do that, suddenly... If you shoot a laser, it still goes at light speed. It's the fastest thing you can shoot. Yep. Right? But you can actually hit something.
You've dragged your target essentially
much
closer to you.
Exactly, so that you can shoot them. Now, if they're moving at uncompressed space, they're moving super slowly because they're not in the warp space.
So conceptually, if you were going to have a form of shielding in this universe, it would basically be mostly based on your warp field, and you would try and alter the warp field. So if the weapon coming right at you... You would try and warp the shape of the space that the lasers coming at you. Yeah. You would try and warp the space of it coming at you around you, so it would mostly miss you.
That totally makes sense.
Or you would try and just slow the light down, or do anything to it, or disperse it.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
So it
lessens the damage.
I don't think that if you're thinking about supercompressing space, the actual ship itself cannot would not be able to survive in super compressed space. Now you're super compressing the thing, or maybe it could, but maybe it wouldn't move normally.
You might have to do both at once.
Yeah, so maybe you're warping space, compressing it in front of you, keeping the bubble around you generally normal space. So you operate a normal thing, and then stretching out the space behind you. Otherwise, how you actually it wouldn't make sense to have it compressed in the front and then compress in the back. Then you're not going anywhere.
You drag more objects into you.
So by stretching it out behind you, shortening it in front of you, you're kind of like zooming forward faster. And so so then you have your field, which protects you with shields, and you could double that up, like you're saying, and say that's also the way, the field is also the way you're actually traveling through the warp space.
Yep. So I'm sure you can make lots of pretty pictures, just like those video games you're talking about, based around the fields having all sorts of visualized versions, just like how we look at NASA pictures of far off solar systems, where they're not really multicolored and all that, but you add the color visualization to if you layer a bunch of different imagery on top of each other, this image means this means this, and it actually looks beautiful when you translate it into something that's
basically just art representing.
Yes, it's turning data into art.
Yeah. Whatever, NASA did it, so therefore it's science.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess that's some of the way that we're thinking about how battles happen. And I think it's interesting, and it's something that I think a lot of even stories and whatever don't explore, except for maybe The Culture, which I've never read.
Yep.
Which makes sense why a lot of other people are like, oh, you should read The Culture, it's so cool.
That might also be why it doesn't translate into movie adaptations so well, because there's too much there's too much cerebralness.
Yeah, but we just talk about, if you talk about fighting in warp space in the way that we do it.
Yep.
I think it like you said, it can't be, because it's in a lot of ways it's not actually real. You can't actually do it. You can just play with translating the data into visualizations, making it look whatever way we want.
So it's like two magicians fighting almost.
Yes, exactly.
There's the fire mage versus the water mage.
It's just great visualizations, and then and that's why we can say, oh, well, there's something that happens in warp. It's the basic principle is you're warping space, so everything is closer than it appears. So then we did it so that the ships can be much closer and they can fire, and that sort of thing makes sense, right?
Yep.
But if you're doing it in a general movie, then you just say, oh, there's all these crazy psychedelic colors, because that's what it looks like.
Just
when you have
like Inception, when things are just moving, folding around and all that.
Yeah, you're just like, oh, this is cool, and whatever. It's imagination anyways, right? There's the fiction in the science fiction, right?
Yeah.
And so you can just say, oh, and this fictional way of how this thing works makes it look beautiful. There's lots of pretty colors that happen at the same time, and there's these weird special effects that are shooting everywhere.
It's just it's like visualizing data. That's all it is.
Exactly. Make it beautiful.
All right. So I think we've talked a lot about how we want to envision the technology working and why it fits that sort of future universe setting.
And I think, what else? Anything else you want to talk about in terms of our game specifically?
I guess our game specifically is set in a post-human universe, but that's a whole big topic that's probably best off separated for another podcast. It's not about their cars they drive around in. It's about more their.
Yeah, I think if we just relate it to the warp things, other things that I think we actually have thought a lot about this thing. So we talked about the battles have to be in warp space, otherwise it wouldn't make sense, right? Obviously, anyone in warp space defeats anyone else.
Also, it fits into the squadron mechanic, because lots and lots of war games out there have a squadron-based mechanic where maybe you have a leader and a bunch of guys around him, and they have to stay in coherency of him.
Yeah.
Or you've got a squad of all the same guys, and they've got to stay in, say, 2 inches or max 8 inches from everything else. It basically incorporates into the fluff of the game why squads have coherency. Yeah,
because they have to stay within the warp field of our capital ships, right? Yep. The other thing, though, I think that's a little bit something you have to think about is when you have general war games, it's 2 ships there, or 2 fleets that are coming at each other head on, right? Yep. If you're talking about warp space, generally you think about warping in one direction, right? You're going in a direction, so the front gets short, the back gets long.
Okay.
How does that make sense when 2 things collide? And they're both getting short, they're getting long behind.
So maybe they all exist in the same bubble.
Yeah, so this is the way we started thinking. We're saying, yes, that's weird. Okay, how does it work? I'm not a physicist. Yeah, I don't know.
Exactly.
But we talked about, all right, so when we collide these two things, maybe something does weird happen. And we thought maybe this is actually when space battles actually happen, is when these two fleets collided, have our warping space directly into each other, right? A head-on warping collision. And it creates some sort of...
Because they're both warping space in front of each other.
Some sort of singularity where the space in all of this area is warped short in every single direction.
Yep, because they're all using their warp drives to shorten space.
In all these different weird things. And for some reason, if you collide them head-on, it becomes some sort of singularity, some bubble that expands outwards for a certain amount of time.
Yep.
And that's where the space battles happen.
And maybe that's why new ships can't jump into it to, like, get reinforcements. They already have to be in there, possibly.
Yes. Yeah, so there's some sort of warp nova, some sort of singularity. These battles happen. They can all fire their guns. All of the space is warped closely. No one can actually get into that bubble at a certain time. And... last any other kind of things. Oh, and there's a certain time limit. Oh, suddenly we can say, oh, you know what?
Oh, on turn 5 or 10, it collapses.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's why the battles only last a certain amount of time.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I don't know if this is cart before horse or whatever, but this is the kind of things that you think about, and you're like, you know what? Maybe this suddenly makes more sense. And you can integrate your game with your mechanics. Your mechanics with the story behind your game to kind of overlap them and make them make more sense.
Because a lot of games do have mechanics where you're like, but why don't they just not do the system and then you just win?
Yes, it seems very gamey. They're like, well, how come they I don't know, they have a certain X number of life or kind of things like that, and you're like, that's just for the game. Just ignore it.
I think the biggest...
For us, I think we really kind of... Okay, so this definitely is still hand-waving, but we at least try to come up with all these different things to make the fluff kind of match the game we're making.
Because I think what we've talked about...
And the other way around, informing the game we're making.
So I think what we've talked about in previous podcasts is the I go, you go versus the integrated turn mechanic, where in some of the I go, you go is like, oh, why are you letting me just... You kick my whole army down before I respond at all. It's like you see that mechanic in all the games, and there's no explicable reason.
Yeah. It's easier... for you to go and do everything before I go.
Exactly. So, and that bothers me, and I'm sure it bothers lots of other gamers. So you want to have some sort of like connection of the mechanics versus why, like a physical reason for why this is occurring in the game mechanics.
Yeah.
Just keep people happy.
Yeah, I think it helps. It helps people get people into the game and stay in the game, because every single time you think of, oh, this doesn't actually makes sense in terms of the simulation of what I'm imagining, it brings you out of the game.
Yeah, it ruins the immersion.
You might as well be playing chess, or not even chess, I don't know, rock, paper, scissors, right? It's just a game.
Yeah, it's just it's theoretical and conceptual. It's not about like the actual physical objects coming at each other and blowing each other up and flying past each other.
Yeah, but the reason why we were playing a miniature game, not a math game, is because we like the visualization, the imagination, the story behind everything. So it becomes, in this type of games, it becomes very, very important.
Yep. So I'm glad we have thought about this whole technological future.
And I'm sure we'll come up with more different things about what makes sense. And maybe we'll come back and say, oh, by the way, the reason why these mechanics happen this way is because of the story that we've kind of put in place.
I don't think we've even said, like... if Star Trek makes sense or doesn't make sense, and Star Wars makes more sense.
Come on, Star Trek makes more sense.
We're just going into another dimension? No, sorry, that's Star Wars. The other
Star
dimension?
Star Wars makes...
We just
depends on how you...
we haven't found the other dimension yet, you know.
In Star Wars, the fighters attack as if they're in the atmosphere. They do dogfighting like atmospheric dogfighting.
They need wings. Yeah, you need wings in space,
and
don't
they do loops and things like that, and you're like, they don't do spin around like they do in Battlestar Galactica, where they actually
they go backwards and they start shooting
spin and everything like that. That's a thing where they're like, we understand that in space changes how ships should go, right? You have vector-based combat, right? The only problem is people don't understand vector-based combat because it's mathy and
it's disorienting
and very hard. Else. Yeah, exactly. We don't live in a place where there's no gravity, so it's hard to imagine what the ships would do.
Yep. It's okay though. I've played video games before where it does involve vector mechanics, but most people don't like vector mechanic based video games.
Star Trek, actually, now that I think about it, I don't think...
No, they fly around too like it's the air.
Yeah,
their big ships fly around like they're in the air.
Yeah, that's true.
And I believe in our game, you're going to fly around like it's in the air. Because that's what everybody likes, and that's what you understand.
It's more fun. There's some sort of gaminess with that.
Yeah, and it's just easier to keep track of as well.
Yeah, so I guess we don't... you can't model exactly your universe because you do have to make some sort of trade-offs. But we are trying to like make the trade-offs as small as possible in both ways, right? So if you can make your mechanics more like how the universe you've set up is, that's great. On the other hand, if you can explain away the things that you did for gameplay by things in the universe, which is a lot of what we did with the warp field technology and stuff like that, then that's also good, right? The important part is that someone can hold in their head a consistent picture while playing their game.
Yep. All right. Well, I think we've talked about a lot of cool sci-fi things. If anyone knows like other big sci-fis that we should watch to see like their technology, or if they have a really cool visualization of these technologies in a movie, or because there's lots of like non-mainstream sci-fi movies out there. That's true.
I'd almost rather though get more books so I can imagine it myself, because bad sci-fi can be really bad.
Oh, don't worry, I've been going on a binge watching sci-fi movies just because we're making this game to see what's out there.
It's almost better if they're cartoons, because it's easier to do things that don't make any sense if it's drawn.
And if they don't have the budget to do really good 3D, it doesn't just get to be cringy.
Terrible looking.
It gets cringy.
All of this 80s sci-fi
that happens to be made in 2013 because they just had no budget.
That we grew up with. That actually is part of the reason why we made the space game.
Yeah, I'm not going to name.
I'm not going to go back and watch them. Most of them, except for Star Trek. It's amazing.
Oh,
Next gen, not the original series.
Yes.
Have you gone back and watched the original series?
Oh, I think I see clips of it once in a while, just people laughing at it.
It does not hold up.
No.
Even the movies don't hold up. You know how people are saying, I hope people don't crucify me for this, where they're like, every odd one is good?
Oh, the
Star Trek movies?
Okay.
I don't agree. I don't think any of the movies are very good.
No, the TV
there's only one. Okay, that's not
good,
true.
But...
Wrath of Khan is number 2, so it must be every even one is good. Wrath of Khan is the only good Star Trek movie of all the movies that have come out.
That could be
all the rest of them are worse.
They're all
than
forgettable.
All the TV shows.
And you won't forget
exactly.
Them.
So there you go, some controversy to throw in there at the last minute.
Yeah.
Wrath of Khan is the only good Star Trek movie.
And there were no good next gen movies.
No,
there were.
No, there were not. No, okay. Jean-Luc Picard is amazing, but the movies are not good.
No, they're not memorable.
Yeah, they're like.
I'm trying to go.
The only thing good about them is that you get to see Patrick Stewart play Jean-Luc Picard again, even though Next Gen had
ended years ago.
Yes.
All right, that's fine. Okay.
I'm gonna have so many complaints, but you know what? That's off topic. We're done.
Exactly. This is not a movie podcast. This is a game podcast.
Yeah.
So, if you want to tell us any movies we should watch that are really cool,
or books, besides The Culture, which I need to read.
Yep.
We'd be super happy to hear about them.
Cool. Well, keep in touch.
This has been Alan.
And this has been Brandon.
Bye.
All right, so if you like this podcast,
you can follow us, do all that social stuff. We'd really appreciate it. If you'd like to comment on what we've been talking about, you can do so here or on Facebook, or you can email us at contact@diceovereverything.com.
Well, thanks for listening.
All right. Bye.